This is Dish and Dirt with Gary Pickren, South Carolina's only podcast dedicated to the real estate agent craft. And now, the host of Dish and Dirt, Gary Pickren.
And greetings and welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Dish and Dirt. I'm your often opinionated but rarely wrong host, Gary Pickren, coming to you from the beautiful downtown Columbia, South Carolina offices of Blair, Cato, Pickren, Castellan, the second week of April 2025. As you know, my mantra is I am rarely wrong but often opinionated. But last week I was actually wrong. I have to admit, I was wrong last week, and I have to correct my incorrect statement that I made. My statement last week was this week was Easter, and therefore I would not be doing a podcast this week. Actually, it's next week. This week is the beginning of the Masters. I had my golf tournaments all messed up because a good friend of mine, Tim, who's a real estate agent down in Hilton Head, has invited me to go down to the Heritage. And I know that's Easter weekend. And for some reason, I was thinking the Masters was Easter weekend. And so with the Masters coming up, I just got it all messed up. But I admit I was wrong. This weekend is not Easter. It is the Masters. It's the week before Easter. Next week, we'll not have a podcast. So this week, this podcast, next week, no podcast. Today's topic is all about re-educating your sellers. Since the Sitzer Burnette case came out, you have spent a lot of time re-educating yourself as to what a real estate agent may and may not do as it relates to compensation. Now, I think you need to spend some time re-educating your seller on various things related to how you work for a seller. You've got to start this at the very beginning. You need to start this in your listing presentation. And as you convince the seller to use you as the listing agent, you're going to need to continue with these items throughout. And right now, I believe there are three major areas that you need to be spending significant time working on your listing presentation and your seller presentation. Even after they've agreed for you to list the property, you need to be working on these areas to make these areas better. And the three areas that I see that you need to spend time re-educating your seller is, number one, what is your role in the transaction? We have allowed that role to be defined as selling real estate, and you do not sell real estate. You do not own the real estate. You didn't build the real estate. You're not selling anything. You're not a car salesman. That's not what you do for a living. You do not sell real estate. But the consumer has been led to believe that that's what you do. And when you have a consumer that believes that all you do is sell, they don't want to pay you. So we've got to redefine and re-educate our sellers on exactly what it is that you as a real estate licensee does. Number two, and we'll probably talk about this topic last, is how is commissions now handled? How are we going to talk with our sellers about paying the buyer side commission, how that's to be documented, and things of that nature? And lastly, which is probably really the most important part here, is fraud. I don't think it's an overstatement to say that fraud in real estate is beyond rampant right now. Between the wire frauds, the going into emails and convincing buyers and sellers to wire money to places they should not be wiring the money, to doing these vacant land schemes where they're posing as sellers, all of those things that are out there, we've got to do a better job of educating both buyers and sellers on fraud. And the reason that is if one of your clients gets hit for one of these frauds, they're likely going to sue everybody in the transaction, whether you had anything to do with it or not, period. That's the bottom line. If your buyer or your seller winds up losing thousands of dollars in a transaction, they are never going to accept responsibility for that. They're going to come straight to you, straight to the closing attorney, and they're going to sue everybody trying to get compensated. And so I was talking with a wonderful agent a couple of days ago, and one of the comments was, all these lawyers are using portals now, and they're not easy for most of our clients because a lot of our older clients don't like to get into the portals. Bottom line is the portals are there for your protection. Without the portals, there is no protection on the wire fraud, the payoff fraud, all of those different frauds. And so we have to have these portals. So if you have a closing attorney that doesn't have a portal, they are living in 1995, and it's just a matter of time before they get hit with fraud. And when they get hit with fraud, guess what? You're going to get hit with fraud because they're going to come after you, because that buyer, that seller is not going to stand for losing tens of thousands of dollars and not look for somebody else to take the fall for that. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk today about getting your listing presentation updated to include these three big topics. In fact, I would say to you, if you're doing the same listing presentation that you did prior to COVID, 5 years ago, good luck to you. And for that matter, I would even say that if you are still doing the same listing presentation pre-August 2024, not even a year ago, what's that, 6 months ago, 7 months ago, if you're doing the same listing presentation that you were doing prior to August of 2024, which is the date that the Sitzer Burnette NAR settlement became finalized and approved, if you are doing it prior to that, and that's the same listing presentation, you got a problem as well. You are going to get sued. So let's start talking about how your presentation should go based on these three big items that need to be part of our listing presentation. When I say listing presentation, I'm not just talking about sitting down with a consumer to convince them to become your client and list a property. I'm talking about that plus some. That's like once they sign the listing agreement, you still are working with this consumer to make sure that their money's protected, their rights are protected. You're providing that fiduciary duty. So this is not just sitting down for the very first time with them and saying, I want to list your house. It's going beyond that. It's once we are in this together, how am I going to continue to help you and protect you? I still remain a huge believer of starting off with the 7 keywords to sell our agency. Again, I didn't create these words. Ruth Marcus, one of the greatest minds in real estate in South Carolina, was the one who came up with these words and shared them with me, and I still use those words. I'm not going to go over all of that today. It's a different podcast, but you can go into this podcast and just search the word agency, and you can find all the classes or all the episodes I've done on agency. So just hit Control F, type in the word agency, and you can see all of the episodes. I'll try to include perhaps one of those in here. You also can go to YouTube, search Blair Cato, get on the Blair Cato YouTube page, and then once you get there, click the magnifying glass and search anything to do with agency. And I've had several videos on there that talk about the 7 keywords of agency. But every agency discussion, every seller presentation, every listing agreement has to start exactly like this. I am required by law to disclose to you agency. Once you use that powerful sentence of I am required by law to disclose to you agency, you win. Because remember, most consumers do not trust real estate agents any more than they trust lawyers, any more than they trust used car salesmen. So you've got to overcome that barrier. A modicum of trustworthiness will win the day. Once you tell them there is a law that you have to comply with and that you are in fact complying, guess what? You now are honest. You've given them the modicum of honesty, and now you're the most honest real estate agent. And we love the word disclose because people want to be told, we don't want to be told anything. We want to learn things, and disclosing sounds like a secret you're giving me or very important information. So we're always going to start with that role. But then we have to deal with this whole issue of that the consumer now has been led to believe that you sell houses. And as long as the consumer feels that you sell houses, you're going to lose. I recently bought a car for my wife. When we went to the dealership, I didn't sit there thinking how much I was going to pay this car salesman. I knew that his salary or his compensation, whatever it might be, was included in the cost of the car, and it wasn't a fee that I was going to have to pay. But that's not how people look at it, or shouldn't look at it, with a real estate agent, because you're not a salesperson, and it shouldn't be a seller's belief that that's included. They have to understand that you are navigating the consumer through the transaction. And as long as they believe that you are simply a salesman, then they don't want to pay you. They want to pay you less than you want to get paid. They want to argue with you and to try to push your compensation down. Now, if they are led to believe, instead of that you're a salesperson and nobody wants to pay a salesperson, if they're led to believe that what your job truly is to be the navigator, then they will not only become your client willingly, but they'll become your super fan. Because nobody becomes a super fan of a salesperson. I don't go around telling people who sold me whatever it may be, oh, you got to use a salesperson. But you want them to become a super fan. And the way to make somebody become a super fan is that you have to show them the value that you add as a real estate agent, as a real estate professional. So you need to convince your consumers that you are doing multiple things for them, fiduciary duties, but you are doing multiple things to them. And what you are doing is you are their guide. You are their navigator. You are going to navigate them through this entire process, which is an invaluable service. I am going to take you from I think I might want to sell my house all the way through listing to closing and beyond. As Buzz Lightyear said in the movies. They also will have to understand that they cannot do it without you. Everybody likes to think they can buy a house or sell a house on their own. And every time they try it, they learn what an absolute nightmare it is because they don't have the knowledge that you have developed. They don't even know what they don't know. Most sellers don't know about a seller disclosure form. They don't know how to complete the seller disclosure form. Things as simple as that, lead-based paint disclosures. They don't know if it applies to them or not if they don't use a real estate agent. All of these items here shows your worth, your knowledge, and your invaluable service. They could not do it without you. And that's why you have to let them understand that what you do is you navigate them through the process. If they ever try to do it themselves, they're going to overpay for the house. They're going to undersell it for less than it's worth, and they're going to make terrible mistakes. And when they make a terrible mistake on the purchase or sale of a house, those mistakes can last for years. So start off by letting them know that your process through this is that you are their navigator. You're going to help them not only list a house, find a buyer, but you're going to help close them and help them beyond the actual sale of the house. A couple of things I think you should do is start with the process and talk to them about what it means for you to navigate. I am going to help get their house ready so that we can list it, so we can put the best picture forward of what this house is. We're going to come up with the best marketing material. We're going to get this marketing all over the place, from the internet to the MLS to social media. You're going to use all the people you know to push this out to the agents you know. We're going to get offers in. We're going to negotiate those offers. We're going to have to evaluate these offers, determine if these offers are good, what's all included in the offer beyond the price, what are the terms, what is the earnest money, what are they asking for in terms of concessions, commissions. We're going to help through the home inspection process, make sure that we have the best inspectors inspecting the home. And then they're not allowing some jackleg to come in here. It's going to make up a bunch of stuff. We're going to evaluate these inspections and these requests for repairs. We're going to negotiate those repairs. We're going to walk them all the way through the issues of repairing things in the house, making sure we get all the information from payoffs and stuff to the closing attorney and get this closed. We're going to come to closing and make sure everything's right, the settlement statement. After closing, we're going to make sure that the money got dispersed properly to you and the house gets turned over, and all of those things that you want to do. Now, what you do not want to do is to give them the NAR list, the National Association of Realtors list of what a realtor does. That is a very lazy way, because that list is going to help people sell the house for the most money for the best to the best client. That's all just fluff. We're going to actually talk to them about real things. And then in this discussion, where we're talking about the parts that you're going to navigate, you're going to throw things at them that you know they don't understand. You're going to talk to them about, of course, we need to get the seller disclosure form. And so I'm going to be there to help you understand how the seller disclosure form works and what you have to disclose. Because, of course, you know you have to disclose items that are still of issue. But if you've repaired them, then we might not have to disclose them. And, of course, there's 16, 15 exemptions to whether or not you have to do it. So we need to walk through those exemptions. They completely have no idea what you're talking about. But what you're doing is showing your depth of knowledge. And it's also scaring them at the same time, making them wonder, oh my gosh, if I don't understand what this is, how could I ever list a house myself? I actually do need this real estate agent to help navigate me through the process. And you do the same thing with a lead-based paint disclosure. We need to get one of these disclosures forms. And so what you're doing is you're talking about all these things that's secondhand nature to you, that doesn't really scare you or concern you, but it's going to scare and concern a consumer if they were trying to do this on their own. So you'll want to make sure that you're doing this. What you're essentially doing is you're talking about your value add. What is it that you're doing? What you're doing is not just finding a buyer. That's not what you're going to do. If they think all you're going to do is go find them a buyer and get it under contract, that's nothing. Who would want to pay you a commission for that's all they're going to do? Because if that's what they think you do in the end, then all they need to do is get it posted somewhere on Zillow or somewhere else, and the buyers will just magically show up. But you and I know that's not how it works. So you need to spend some time this weekend thinking about what your role is and what you do for the consumer, the seller, which is navigate. Learn to explain what navigation is. Learn to explain the value adds that you give them so that they will understand the value in having you and paying you, which is the most important. Now, the best way, in my opinion, that you can show that you care and that you help navigate a consumer through closing is to protect them on fraud. Remember, 71% of all consumers think it is someone else's responsibility to educate them about fraud. Why does that number scare you? It scares me because I know what that means. When there is some level of fraud, guess what? They're going to look to somebody else to pay for them because it's not their responsibility. So you're going to need to spend some time, particularly with your buyers, but also with your sellers, talking about fraud. There's some scary stats out there. 1 out of every 4 real estate closing is targeted with suspicious communications. 1 out of every 20 results in someone being a victim. Think about that. That means in your career, the next 3 to 4 years, somebody you work with will be a victim of fraud. And by the way, the average loss is now over $70,000. If you think your consumer is going to lose $70,000 and then not look for other people to pay for it, you're crazy. Which brings me back to what I said earlier. You need to make sure you're using a closing attorney that has very strong fraud protections in place. In fact, you ought to go sit down with the closing attorney and say, what are y'all doing to protect for fraud? And why fraud? If you do not have an attorney that has some type of portal for verification of wires, you are risking it. And we know how one of the major frauds happens is that once the scammer finds out that someone's selling a house, they will reach out to the closing attorney, send wiring instructions, and hope that the closing attorney doesn't verify the wiring instructions and then wires the funds out to a fraudster. We've had it happen several times in closings where we are literally doing a closing with the people, and at the same time, an email is coming in saying, I don't want my wire sent to where I told you earlier, I want it now sent here. And you're sitting there in the closing with them, you come out, and you'll look at your email and say, whoa, wait a minute, somebody's actually asking us to do this. So you print the email off and go inside the closing room and say, I just got this email. Like, what are you talking about? I'm sitting right here. I didn't email you that. It's a fraud. It happens all the time. But luckily at Blair Cato, we don't wire like that. Your client goes into our portal, they enter the information, and then our portal verifies that that is an account at that bank and that that's a valid number. So we are always trying to stay ahead of the fraudster. So you need to make sure that the closing attorney you're using has some type of portal, some type of system out to verify the wiring instructions for your seller, particularly if the seller is not coming to closing. We need to make sure that you're verifying it. And so one of the things that you want to do to show the seller you're protecting them is if you are dealing with a seller on remotely and they're not here to meet with you face to face, is ask your seller to send you a text of their driver's license front and back. Don't get them to email it to you in black and white. Get them to send it to you as a photograph so you can look at it. Look at that photograph and see if that makes sense. Ask them to get on a Zoom with you. In most cases, if a seller refuses to get on a Zoom with you, that's a pretty good indication it's not really the seller. And so even though you are working with the seller, you're still wanting to show the seller that these are the things that you're doing to protect them. So one of the things I would do is say, we have a lot of seller impersonation. And one of the things that I do for all of my sellers is I want to guarantee their identity. So I need to get a copy of your driver's license and I need to look at that and compare it to you and ask them some questions about it. Do those things to make sure that they are covered. Also, if you have a firm like Blair Cato that does have these strong fraud protections in there, go ahead and tell your seller that Blair Cato will never ask for you to email the wiring instructions. We're not going to do that. I would never ask a client to email me the wiring instructions. We're going to ask them to go in the portal, enter the information, and then once inside the portal, we're going to have that information and we're going to verify that. If it's some reason they're old school and can't get in the portal, don't understand it, when they come to closing, they will fill out the wiring instructions at the closing and we'll have them sign it right there in front of the lawyer so it can be notarized and we know that they have it. Also, if your seller has to wire money anywhere, ask them to always call wherever they're wiring their funds. In fact, most sellers shouldn't bring funds to closing, but in the few times that they do, make sure your seller knows not to wire any funds to any law firm until they call you to verify the information. One of the things that these fraudsters do is that they will ask for a wire without sending a settlement statement. No law firm is ever going to ask a buyer or a seller to send it money until they send a settlement statement showing the figures. Now, one thing you also can do for your clients is go to NAR. NAR has a wonderful program on fraud. They have some nice worksheets. I would say get with your broker and talk about perhaps coming up with some type of worksheet or disclosure that you can go through with your seller, you can go through with your buyer, have them initial or sign off that you've gone over all this information and you've warned them about the fraud. But when you go back to that statistic of 71% of consumers thinks it's somebody else's responsibility, that's where you've got to prove that, yeah, okay, if you still think it's my responsibility, which I don't think it is, I'm still educating you on it. If you're this dumb not to follow what we're telling you, then there's no help for you. So that is one of the value adds that you certainly can show them. Now, the last topic that you need to cover in your new listing presentation or meetings with your seller is about compensation. And you need to start figuring out a better way of discussing compensation. And so I've come up with about 10 or 11 things that the seller needs to understand in no particular order. But you need to start preparing your seller for an offer that's going to come with commission requests. The first thing you need to, in my opinion, to understand, you and the seller, is that as a listing agent, the only thing you should really be worried about is your compensation. Quit worrying about the buyer side compensation. It doesn't matter what the buyer gets paid to you. What does it matter to you? What should matter to you as a listing agent is what your compensation is. But for some odd reason, we're spending so much effort and capital or whatever, talking to our sellers, trying to convince them that they need to pay some particular commission before we even list the property in the multiple listing service. I don't know why we are spending our hard-earned capital and reputation with our sellers, trying to convince them as to what they need to pay the other side. It's irrelevant, and I'll explain that in a minute. Quite frankly, when I've talked to a lot of the top agents in town, they're telling me they're getting paid more now on the listing side, because instead of asking the seller to pay both their side and the buyer side and commit to this in the listing agreement, they're just asking for their side to be paid, and they're actually going up a half a point or a full point on their side. It's a whole lot easier to convince them to pay just you a little bit more than to pay you and the other side. When you do have the seller sign the listing agreement, that's when you need to have the conversation about the buyer. I would never pressure or ask them to commit to pay the buyer anything. What I would do is I would talk to them about at some point when a contract comes in, the buyer may ask you to pay some, all, or none of the commission. We don't need to get into right now what that's going to be, because we don't know. Perhaps they bring a cash offer and they ask for no commission. Perhaps they only want part of the commission. Or in South Carolina, a lot of people are going to ask for all of the commission. But we don't need to worry about that right now until we see what the offer is and see how much they want for the commission. So the main point you want to get across to your seller is the sellers need to quit saying what they won't do. Don't say you're not going to pay the commission. You don't know what the offer is. So why would I sit here and say, there's no way I'm ever going to pay a buyer's agent commission? I'm not going to do it. Well, if my house is listed for $300,000 and they offer me $340,000 cash and they want me to pay their agent X percent, why would I say no to that? But I've already told the world I'm not going to do it. For what reason? Why would you ever say no before you know? So sellers need to stop saying what they will and what they won't do, or how much is the maximum they're going to pay. If a seller says, well, I'm not going to pay more than 2 or 2.5, my response to them is, we don't even know what an offer is yet. Why would you say that? We don't know. If somebody comes with you a crazy offer, you wouldn't pay 5, 6, 8, 10, pay whatever if the offer is good enough. So we need to start educating our sellers now. Not when the offer comes in, because when the offer comes in, they've already done the math in their head and they've already started trying to figure out how much money they're going to make. You need to start working with them early, showing them how that works. Start talking about not saying no to paying a commission, or I'm only going to pay this amount until we know what the offer is. Don't get set in their mind what they will or won't pay. You need to talk to them about being flexible. We need to wait until that offer comes in to determine. And when that offer comes in, guess what is king? The net sheet will be king here. You need to start working with the net sheet day one. Show them what a net sheet is. Show them how it works. In fact, if I were you, I would probably have some sample net sheets showing them that if I got 3 offers at 300, 305, and 310, that 310 might be the worst offer if they're asking for $20,000 in concessions and the others offer asking for 0. That the highest offer could be the worst offer. And what we don't need to be doing as sellers is worrying about what the dollar amount is on the sales price. What we need to be worried about is what the dollar is on the net sheet. Because again, if I have my house listed at 300 and they offer me 315, it sounds like I got $15,000 over asking price until I find out they want $30,000 in concessions. That's not such a good deal. But on the other hand, if somebody comes in, asks at 300 and they offer 315 with 15,000 in concessions, I'm at 300 grand net. So we need to start looking at the net, start showing them how a net sheet works, telling them and showing them this is what it would look like if a buyer's agent asked for this amount. Start getting your sellers educated on net sheet as king, not the offer amount. The next part, you need to be discussing with your seller that if a seller is willing to pay concessions or seller closing costs, then you're willing to pay commissions. It doesn't matter where the money goes. If I've agreed to pay $10,000 concessions, it doesn't matter ultimately whether that money goes to the lender, the attorney, or the real estate agent, or a combination of all three. If I'm selling my house for 300 and I'm paying 10,000 in concessions, that's a 290 net. What does it matter to me where those dollars go? So they need to be flexible on that and only worry about what the dollar amount is and quit worrying about where it goes to. I've had a lot of agents tell me this, that people get all mad that this amount of money is going to their commissions as they thought was all going to closing costs. What does it matter? The money is the money. The net sheet is king. The next thing they need to be educated on is you don't have to see an offer before agreeing to a comp amount. And I get this all the time. They send a comp agreement over, but I'm not going to sign it until I see the offer. If you sign the comp agreement, it only obligates you to pay the comp if you accept the offer. So again, we go back to the net sheet. If somebody sends me a comp agreement saying, I want you to pay $10,000 and the offer comes in and it's bad, I just don't accept the offer and the comp agreement's irrelevant. If they send me an offer and I don't like the offer based on that comp amount, guess what I do? I counter offer it. All that matters is the net, and you can put the commissions in any way you want to and work your way to that net. And that's the thing that matters the most. The other aspect I think that needs to be really explained to the seller is we don't need to advertise any commission. A lot of agents are telling me, well, my seller's got to get the 3% notice out there. Wow. Why does it matter that you are notifying anybody the 3%? In the past, if you advertise in the MLS, you are bound to that if somebody brought you an offer. Because commission is no longer paid that way, it doesn't matter. Somebody could advertise $1 million commission with an acceptable offer. It doesn't matter unless there's an acceptable offer, which would be the sales price plus $1 million, I'm sure. So it doesn't matter. Me advertising 2, 3, 4, 8, 10, 12% isn't going to do anything because it doesn't obligate me to pay anything. It's just advertising. It's fluff. It's market. It means nothing. So quite frankly, if I was advertising, and I would never do this, but if I was trying to advertise, I'd put 10% commission. What do I care? Because all I'm going to do is add it to the price of the house. No one's going to ask for 10 because they can only get what the buyer agreed to pay them. It's the maximum they can get. So none of these numbers matter. They're all illusory. Until we have it written in a contract or obligate ourselves in a Form 120, it doesn't matter what you advertise. So when your seller's sitting here telling you, I have to put 3% on my house, I need to get it out there somehow, your answer is no, you don't. And why would we bid against ourselves? Maybe somebody's willing to make an offer at 2%. Maybe somebody's willing to make an offer at 0%. So why are you going ahead and telling them what you will and won't do when they haven't even asked you for anything yet? Let them ask, and then we'll decide. I had an example of the day. Somebody posted on social media. It was a picture of a sign for sale, and it said 2.5% buyer commission. And people were debating, was that good or not? And everybody's like, oh, yeah, that's great. You'll let the buyers know that you're willing to pay concessions. What it tells me is any buyer who thinks they need 3% isn't going to look at your house. So if there are 10 buyers who have agreed to pay 3% to their buyer's agents, they see 2.5%. That's not helping them. They're just going to walk away. Now, I'm pretty sure that the seller would probably agree to the other 0.5% if it was included in the price of the offer. Sure, they would. But now they have limited themselves at 2.5%, and nobody's going to look at the house because of that. So what I would be doing, and this is where you truly need to educate your seller, is telling your seller that when a buyer calls or anybody asks, my seller is willing to entertain any offer that includes commissions or concessions. All you need to do is submit it to us with your offer. We'll be happy to look at it. So if we can change the mindset of the seller and let the sellers know we don't have to agree right now as to what you're going to pay in a commission. We don't need to advertise what that commission is. And when somebody calls us, all we're going to say is we will be open to any offer that includes commissions or concessions. Make your offer. If a buyer calls and says, well, would you be willing to pay 5%? If that's what you want, include in a commission or concession. Don't say no until we see the offer. When we see the offer, we can either counter, accept it, or reject it. It's that simple. We have made this thing more difficult than it needs to be. We've overthought this. And I go on Facebook groups all the time and look at all the stupid things that real estate agents talk about how they have to get this number out there and how they need to get their seller to agree to 3%. And if their seller won't agree to 3%, then they're not going to list a house because they're never going to sell it. That is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. And I feel like I'm repeating myself, but make sure you understand this. You don't need to spend your time, effort, or worry talking to the seller now about what they will pay. They just need to keep an open mind, look at a net sheet and see how much they're going to net. And when that comes in, when that offer comes in, we look at the net sheet. If it nets us enough money, we're great. If it doesn't, we counter offer. We don't need to advertise it. We don't need to put it out there. We just need to tell everybody my seller has got an open mind to any contract with commissions or concessions. Submit the offer and we'll decide it. It's that simple. I do not understand for the life of me why 40,000 real estate agents in South Carolina are making it more difficult. We've re-educated ourselves. Now let's re-educate our sellers so they can start thinking in a better mindset. All right. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. Again, next week we're off for Easter. For the podcast, we'll be back the following week with another episode of Dish and Dirt. Hope everybody has a safe and happy Easter. Y'all come back and see us.